You guys, I am so annoyed. If you follow me on Instagram, you will know that the last video I did, which is purely, like literally only about normalizing normal female bodies, YouTube for some reason decided that it was harmful content, inappropriate content, and it should be age restricted. So nobody under the age of 18 can watch that video, and I've even had followers of mine that are like 35, 40 years old. They are not allowed to watch the video unless they sign into a YouTube account and provide their ID. All for a video that is literally just talking about normalizing normal human female bodies. Like, I don't even know if there's any point me filming this video because if it gets age restricted, hardly any of you guys are even going to be able to watch it. And yet here I am, I'm all dolled up, I've got my hair done, got my makeup on, and I'm sitting here filming. So fingers crossed, guys, that you'll actually be able to see this video. So all of us that have eyes and are on social media, we are aware of today's body standards. Like I certainly am. I've made enough bloody videos about it. Now I'm a bit of a nerd and I love history, and I really wanted to delve into how the heck we went from this to this. There is quite a large difference between these two body standards. So I was just going to look into it and research it on my own, but then I was like, you know what, I'm just going to turn this into a video because there might be some of you guys that are intrigued by this as well. So here we are. Let's rewind 100 years ago. I feel like that's a good place to start. In the 1920s. So the 1920s body standards was all about the flapper. It was a real androgynous look. Women had been bound up in corsets and these huge puffy dresses with their bosoms packed super high for like 100 years before that. And honestly, I think they were just over it. They wanted to feel loose and free and be able to dance whilst breathing without having their internal organs restricted by corsets. And so emerged the flapper. These women did not wear corsets. They did not want to emphasize their waist at all. In fact, that's why they wore these dresses that were like super up and down. And they were able to dance and move freely and enjoy themselves because before that, women had really been stifled. Now, to be honest, in the 1930s, I feel like that is a forgotten decade because nothing of real interest actually happened. Women still wanted to feel comfortable and free in their clothes, but the big bosom came back in fashion, and they did start to cinch in the waist a little bit more compared to the 1920s when waists were not in fashion. Now, the 1940s is pretty interesting because they were suffering through World War II, and that did definitely influence the body standards of that decade. The focus on women and women's bodies in the 1940s was no longer focused around femininity or glamour. Women in the 1940s were expected to be functional and practical, and so were their bodies. So for women in the 1940s, they wanted their bodies to look strong and capable, and actually, weightlifting started gaining popularity in the 1940s because women wanted to have, you know, a definite look of muscle about them. They really took on the challenge of World War II to step into a lot of men's roles that traditionally only men had been allowed or able to do. And with so many of their men off fighting World War II, the women really had to step into those roles and take charge, and I feel like we have never left. The 1950s. The 1950s was just a very forgiving era for the female body. As World War II came to an end, so did rationing, and so food started becoming abundant again, and a well-nourished woman started to become fashionable. So that's when you start seeing the emergence of the hourglass figure. What would be considered chubby nowadays was actually super sought after in the 1950s. In the 1950s, women wanted to be soft and curvy and voluptuous. They wanted full hips and full bellies. Editing Stephanie here, just jumping in to show you guys these mind-blowing newspaper clips from the 1950s. These are ads showing women how to increase their appetites and gain weight, as being skinny wasn't considered body goals back then. How wild is it that now, in our generation, we are bombarded with ads selling us diet shakes and diet pills, and we've got influencers like the Kardashians doing ads for appetite-suppressing lollipops. It just goes to show that the very notion of beauty standards for bodies is a load of crap. What is considered body goals for one generation can be the total opposite for the next, so don't beat yourself up if your body refuses to adhere to its generation's ideal of body standards. You are bloody beautiful exactly as you are. A well-known example of this is the beautiful Marilyn Monroe. Like, she's been dead a long time and she is still considered one of the most beautiful women that has ever lived. Her thighs touched, she had a full belly, and she wasn't a size 0. Okay, I swear I'm about to move on from the 1950s, but I just have to mention, in case she hasn't graced your eyes yet, look at Hilda. Hilda was a pin-up cartoon that ran from the 1950s all the way to the 1980s, and she was just an absolute babe. Like, she embodied that fun, playful, confident woman's nature that like is so alluring. And again, Hilda is not a size 0. She's just like the ultimate pin-up. Like, look at that body. Now, because I'm a weirdo, just for the crack, I decided to edit Hilda's body to fit today's beauty standards just to see what it would look like. And as you guys can see, it doesn't bloody look right, does it? I would love to see for Victoria's Secret's next fashion show, they do like a Hilda inspired fashion show. Imagine that. Imagine like loads of different shaped women walking down the catwalk instead of all the girls looking exactly the same. Like, how epic would that be? All right, moving on to the 1960s. With the 1960s came the age of sexual liberation. Women were further stepping into their power. Beatles and rock music hit the airwaves. Woodstock happened. Oh my God, what I would do to have actually attended Woodstock. There was a lot happening in the 1960s, and along with all that came Twiggy. Similar to the 1920s, Twiggy really embodied that kind of androgynous look. She wasn't voluptuous and curvy, she was actually extremely petite, hence the name Twiggy. Gone were the luscious curves of the 1950s, and they were replaced by extremely slim builds and slenderness. And to be honest, in the 1970s, nothing really changed all that much. Women still wanted to be skinny, but now they also wanted to look athletic. So they didn't just want to be Twiggy, they wanted to be Twiggy that went to the gym. And I'm sorry to be totally boring here, guys, but again, in the 1980s, not a whole lot changed. However, one big difference is that in the 1980s, the boob job gained popularity. And women like Pamela Anderson, who embodied that kind of slender but athletic body shape, now wanted huge boobs as well. So then hit the 1990s and things did change a little bit. Enter models like Kate Moss, who embodied what's known as heroin chic. If you guys have no idea what heroin chic is and you're like, Steph, are you actually trying to get yourself actively demonetized? Let me explain to you what heroin chic is. So heroin chic was popularized in the early 1990s and was characterized by pale skin, dark circles underneath the eyes, a very skinny body, stringy hair, and angular bone structure. Now moving on to the noughties, the 2000s, I was a teenager growing up in the 2000s decade. And I've got to be honest with you guys, I feel like heroin chic was still kind of a thing even when I was a teenager. Like I said, I was always really scrawny, but I remember flicking through the magazines of the day like Girlfriend and Dolly and being greeted with pictures of it girls like Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, Nicole Richie, and they all started off as being like, you know, normal, differently shaped, beautiful girls. And then they all kind of morphed into this exact same body type where they were size zeros. Like they were so skinny. I will never be one to skinny shame because I've had that done to me and it feels awful, but it did look as though these girls had become undernourished. I remember looking at pictures of those girls and being like, should I be skinnier? Like, is that what I'm supposed to look like? And I feel like that decade and those it girls is where things really started to go wrong for us in regards to body beauty standards. Because if you look at Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, and Nicole Richie, before they all slimmed down to this exact same body type, they all looked totally different to each other. Paris Hilton was super tall and super slim. Lindsay Lohan was kind of just the average girl next door. And Nicole Richie was beautifully soft and curvy. And when those three girls kind of morphed into having the exact same body proportions, it planted the seed for what has grown into today's unrealistic beauty standards. And you know what's sad? I feel like things could have gone so differently. I remember in 2001, I think it was, Bridget Jones's Diary movie came out and everyone thought she was just the bee's knees. Like she was kind of like the girl next door. She wasn't a size zero. She wasn't heroin chic. She didn't have a tiny waist. She had a full belly. She wasn't an hourglass figure, but she was just realistic. She was just like a realistic woman. She just was unashamedly herself, and I think she was an epic character. Like, look at Bridget Jones in the bunny costume. Like, what a babe. I feel like we were on the cusp then of our body beauty standards going down that route, but instead we went this route. So fast forward to today, and you guys will know as well as I do that the body beauty standards of today are just absolutely ridiculous, to be honest with you. Like, they are bullshit. And now we've ended up with the wasp look, which is where you've got big boobs, big hips, big bum, a tiny waist, which is literally not physically possible. If you've ever looked at a Bratz doll, does it not look very, very familiar to loads of beauty gurus that you've seen and loads of Instagram influencers that you have seen? Because it looks very familiar to me. You know the beauty standards are unrealistic when instead of being expected to look like a human woman who eats food and lives her life and has a job and maybe has children, you're expected to look like a damn Bratz doll.